Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and I am the Math Lab Coordinator and can be found in room 222 of the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. This is the lesson on subtracting integers and is the continuation of adding integers. If you need help with addition of integers, please watch that and then return to this this episode of the podcast. Subtraction of integers is the idea of subtraction of integers is that subtraction is adding the opposite. When we subtract, we're really taking away something. And as a subtraction, we want to take away the opposite. On a number line, if we have 3 minus 4, then we're going to count out to 3 on the number line. And then to take away 4 units, we have to take away, 4 is a positive number, but to take away 4 units, we'd have to go back 1, 2, 3, 4 units. We move in the opposite direction of a positive 4, which is a negative 4. Well, that gives us a negative 1 as our final answer. If I have $3 and I spend $4, we know that we're going to be $1 short or $1 in debt. We know that answer is going to be a negative 1. So we understand then, I hope, that that's going to be the same as 3 plus a negative 4, because we've started out in both cases at 3 and we've moved backwards 4 units. Well, that's the taking away 4 units is the same as adding a negative 4 units. And so that's why addition is the same as adding the opposite. Because as we look at this, that 3 subtract 4 and 3 plus a negative 4 is really the same concept. So our rule for subtraction is really quite simple. We simply change all of our subtraction thought process into an addition thought process, and we go with the addition rules. Now, as we look at this, we have what I call my duck theory, which is we don't want to get into a lot of complicated sign changes because that can really make our life complicated. So when we look at a problem like 3 subtract 4, and we know that it's really going to be the same as 3 plus a negative 4, we can, and some of our teachers do, teach you to change it into adding the opposite. In other words, every time you see 3 minus 4, we can actually start out by saying, change those signs. Change that subtraction sign into adding, and notice the green, and I'm using the green to emphasize, change that subtracting to adding the opposite, and thus we have an addition problem. And the addition rule is if the signs are the same, we add or find their sum, and if the signs are different, we find their difference. In this case, these signs are different, and we'll find their difference. And the difference between 3 and 4 is 1, and we keep the sign of the stronger number, 4 being stronger, so it'll be a negative 1. However, that's a lot of sign change. And the thing that you want to see is, this is my duck theory. This 4 looks like a negative. When we change its sign, it becomes a negative. So if it looks like a negative, becomes a negative, which means it quacks like a negative. So it looks like a negative, it quacks like a negative, therefore it must be a negative. Well, it's not. It's a subtract sign. But because it's going to make it act like a negative, we can say that the signs are opposite. because that's going to be adding the opposite. Therefore, these signs are different because it's going to be adding the opposite. So opposite signs, so we will find their difference. Subtract the numbers. Then the 4 is more of a subtraction because it's a negative. It's the stronger number. Therefore, we can say it's a -1. Let's look at another example. -5 subtract 2. Again, this 2 is going to become a negative. We know that because it's going to become -5 plus a -2. And again, if you can see it here, you don't have to rewrite it here in the second part. If you don't see it in that second part, this part, if you can think it, you don't have to write it. If you see it here because it looks like a -2, it acts like a -2, you don't have to rewrite it unless you're having a lot of difficulty. How can you tell? Well, come in and work with me and we can look at it and tell whether you're having trouble. But here, the signs are the same. They're both negative. So that then tells me the signs are the same. I need to find their sum. 5 plus 2 is 7. And then keep the sign of the larger, which is 5 and is negative. So it would be a -7. -6 subtract 3. The signs are the same. That 3 becomes plus a -3, remember? So the signs are the same. Add and keep the sign. Again, this part is completely optional. If you're seeing that already, you can skip that part. 3 minus 7. The signs are different here. So we're going to subtract, and that 7 is the stronger number, so we'll just keep it a negative. And again, if you're having trouble seeing that, remember that's going to be 3 plus a -7. And now you can see that the signs are different, and we keep the sign. Let's get a new page and do a few more examples for the subtraction. Because there are some that are harder than those. Because those weren't too bad. But we do have some that have to be simplified. And those are the ones with 2 negatives in between. These are the ones that can't make up their mind whether they're negative or positive. They're 2 negatives. And we want to remember here, again, that rule says that we're adding the opposite. So adding the opposite, that's 2 positives. So that's 2 plus 4, and that gives me 6. The signs are the same. We find their sum and keep the sign of the larger, so it's a +6. Now, how do we subtract a number and get a +6? Well, go back to our number line idea. We're at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I take away a subtraction, I've got to move what's going on? There it goes. Sorry about that. I've got to take away a -1, 2, 3, 4 units. I start out at a +2, and to take away a -4, that's the opposite of a -4. So I've got to move in a +4 direction. And where does that end up at? 3, 4, 5, 6 ends up at a +6 direction. In other words, I've got to do the opposite of taking away 4, which is adding 4. To take away a negative, I've got to add, because it's always taking away is to do the opposite motion. And that's what you've got to remember about these. Okay, let's look at some additional examples. Again, -5 minus a -1. Two minuses become adding the opposite. -5 plus 1. The signs are different, so we subtract. It's not when it's always plus here that we always add. We have to look at what our final signs are. And we have a -5 and a +1 now. And with the -5 and the +1, the signs are different. So we find their difference. So 1 from 5 gives me 4, and I keep the sign of the stronger number, which is 5. It's more negative than the one is positive, so my answer is a -4. 7 minus a -6. Those become adding the opposite. I end up with 7 plus 6, which just gives me 13. -8 minus 6. Notice here we don't have the double signs. As long as we don't have the double signs, that's just a -6. It acts like a -6. If you need to rewrite it, remember it would be 8 plus a -6. The signs are the same, whether we rewrite it in the second or whether we look at it in the first. That gives me the signs are the same, so I add and keep the sign. -4 subtract 7. The signs are the same. I add and keep the sign. -8 minus a -8. This one's got those double signs with each other, so I have to change these. -8 plus 8. -8 plus 8. The signs are different, so I subtract. 8 minus 8 is 0. Remember, 0 doesn't have to have a sign. It's neutral. -2 subtract 4. The signs are the same. Subtract and keep the sign. -8 subtract a -2. Again, those double signs. -8 plus 2. The signs are different. Subtract. Keep the sign of the stronger number. Folks, these are just a handful of examples to kind of help out with adding and subtracting your positive and negative numbers. This particular episode of the podcast was your subtraction. There isn't a podcast for your addition alone. I hope these podcasts help in adding and subtracting your positive and negative numbers. If you're still struggling or have questions, be sure to stop by and see us in room 222 of the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. If you need additional help, look for the podcast, additional help on multiplication and division. Look for podcast on multiplication and division of integers to help with that topic. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.